So we're talking about violence, we're talking about drug cartels, we're talking about money, we're talking about bribes, we're talking about extortion, we're talking about destroying the West. And it all comes down to the thing, when I got fired by General Mattis' staff, and they said to me, why won't your system, what you did in Vietnam, gathering human intelligence, surrounded by the North Vietnamese army, why won't it work in Iraq or Afghanistan? And I said, it's simple. Because over there they were Buddhists, and over in Iraq and Afghanistan they're Muslims. And they responded, what's religion got to do with it? Clip number 10. Let's find out what religion has to do with it. Clip number 10.
Some time ago I had a conversation with a Marxist economist from China. He was coming to the end of a Fulbright fellowship here in Boston. But I asked him if he had learned anything that was surprising or unexpected. And without any hesitation, he said, yeah. I had no idea how critical religion is to the functioning of democracy. The reason why democracy works, he said, is not because the government was designed to oversee what everybody does. But rather, democracy works because most people, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the law. And in your past, most Americans attended a church or synagogue every week, and they were taught there by people who they respected. My friend went on to say that Americans followed these rules because they had come to believe that they weren't just accountable to society, they were accountable to God. My Chinese friend heightened a vague but nagging concern I've harbored inside, that as religion loses its influence over the lives of Americans, what will happen to our democracy? Where are the institutions that are going to teach the next generation of Americans that they too need to voluntarily choose to obey the laws? Because if you take away religion, you can't hire enough police.
Good stuff. James 1:27, True Religion's Taking Care of Widows and Orphans. I got this book here. My degree's in political science. Yeah, who cares? Democracy in America. Now, notice how thick it is. It's almost 800 pages thick. When you go to the modern day political science classes that they offer in college today, the book is only about this thick right here. They cut everything out about Christianity. They cut everything out about voluntarily choosing to follow the law of the Decalogue. This book by Alexis de Tocqueville he was stunned. He came from France after the revolution, and he was looking how we operated. Quote from the book on page 291, and Christian morality is everywhere the same. One may suppose that a certain number of Americans in the worship they offer to God are following their habits rather than their convictions. Besides, in the United States, the sovereign authority is religious, and consequently hypocrisy should be common nonetheless. America is still a place where the Christian religion has kept the greatest real power over men's souls, and nothing better demonstrates how useful and natural it is to man, since the country where it now has widest sway is both the most enlightened and the freest. He's saying that religion is the basis of America's highest degree of prosperity and all of the peace, order, liberty, and prosperity that we have. Let's look at how we're going down the road when Los Angeles and the other sanctuary cities throw out religion. The true religion is taking care of widows and orphans, James 1:27. And when they're talking about voluntarily choose to follow the law, he's talking about the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. We have tons of proof from this book here, Democracy in America, and from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 of the Constitution, the law of nations based on the Decalogue. We have Defense Department documents from 1957 that I've quoted frequently on these shows, points out that the primary job of the military officer is to defend and protect the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, because that's the basis of our Constitution. As John Adams said, our form of government was based on a moral people. We do that which is morally correct because we stop and we look as Christians or Jews at the Ten Commandments, and then we apply the Ten Commandments to how we're going to make our axiological or our ethical decision through the course of the day. Metaphysics being based on ontology, cosmology, epistemology, and I believe axiology too. When we look at that, this comes from Blackstone's commentaries on the law, and it all goes back to the Ten Commandments. When you walk away from that morality, that internalized, inculcated morality that we used to be taught in the United States as children, both Protestant Christians, because 98% of the people in the United States, when the Constitution of the United States was written, were Protestant Christians, and that's what he talks about in Democracy in America. He says the vast majority of the people who came to the United States had rejected papal authority. They did not reject biblical or Jesus authority or Christian authority, the Bible, not at all. In fact, what they had done was advanced a higher degree of obedience to the Ten Commandments. Yes, we're under grace, not law. We've always been under grace, not law. Abraham's faith was counted for righteousness. But we also know in Romans 3:31, do we nullify the law by faith? No, we establish it. What law is he talking about? The Ten Commandments. Clip number 12. Clip number 12.
Gangs don't recognize street borders, city borders, divisional borders, and obviously they don't recognize countries, our physical borders.
LA streets were the breeding ground for what law enforcement calls one of the most dangerous and bloodthirsty gangs in the world, MS-13.
They've gained notoriety over the years because of their willingness to be extremely ruthless.
Correction, one block west of Preston. Female Hispanic, approximately 16 years old, 5'7", wearing a white t-shirt and a grayish pants.
The reach of the gang, it's not limited to one particular city. It actually has the ability to transcend between the United States and Central America, and it becomes a very big concern for law enforcement.
MS-13 was born here in the Hispanic neighborhoods west of downtown Los Angeles.
We're in Lafayette Park, which is pretty much the one of the original.
So you got MS-13. By the way, there's 18,000 of these guys operating in the Washington, D.C. area as I speak now. 18,000 in Washington, D.C. They're in Dallas. They're in Seattle. They're in Oklahoma City. They're in Iowa City, Sioux Falls. They're in Nebraska. They're in Fargo in the Dakotas. They're in Atlanta, Georgia. They're in Miami. They're everywhere. If they don't operate based on the Ten Commandments, oh, no, no, no. They operate based on the same thing as ISIS. ISIS is based on Surah 860 to wage war and to terrorize the infidel. And MS-13 has linked together with ISIS, and they are doing that. Clip number 13.
Gang's weapon of choice, a machete.
We've had a number of cases where hands have been severed, where people have gotten horrific scars on the face of their body after being stabbed or slashed with a machete.
It's a group that respects violence, that celebrates violence.
And MS-13 also celebrates chaos.
You got stabs, you got gunshots, and you got any weapons you can, grab a hold of.
MS-13 demands complete secrecy and loyalty.
If you're in this, you already know the rules, you already know your duties, your job,
25-year-old Blade asked to have his...
It says that you already know what you're supposed to do, your duties. It is to break the Ten Commandments. It is to hunt down innocent people and destroy their lives. It does the same thing. It does the same thing as what ISIS does based on the Quran, Surah 8:60, right there. ISIS, and you got MS-13. You got the Sinaloa and the Los Zetas. You got the cartels. They're working together. They're in collusion together. They finance together, they come together, and they kill together. They have totally rejected the Ten Commandments. They have totally rejected the American ethos, the axiological ethos that the law flows from the Ten Commandments. I will show you in a few seconds the father of international law who wrote the law of war and peace, and that it's based on the Ten Commandments. Very interesting. In the Super Bowl the other day, the quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, Mr. Foles, did a great job. But he wants to become a Christian pastor. He already is a Christian, and he gave credit to Jesus. Well, a lot of people scoffed at that. Now, this Jewish gentleman here, this is Dennis Prager, he said, praise God. He's Jewish, Orthodox Jewish. He says, I'm not Christian, but I know, as a Jew, that if the Christian way of life disappears in the United States, the Jews will be hunted down and killed. And who better to do it? As Mr. Foles says, he gave all credit to Jesus, and Dennis Prager says, I'm not a Christian, but I'm glad he gave credit to Jesus, because as long as the Christians have their moral way, we, the Jews, will not be destroyed as we were in World War II. So we come back again. What's religion got to do with it? Well, why does ISIS go out and terrorize and wage jihad against everybody? Because it's in the Quran, chapter 8, verse 60. And now they're joined together with Sinaloa. What better way to wage war against the infidel and to terrorize the infidel and kill the infidel, but to have the drug cartels of MS-13, Sinaloa, Los Zetas, all of the different hundreds and hundreds of different types of drug cartels working with ISIS to fund it. Now, the father of international law, Hugo Grotius. It was Hugo Grotius and The Law of Nations. His book was On the Law of War and Peace. He wrote it many, many years ago, between 400 and 500 years ago. And in here, he explains a very interesting phrase that's found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 of the Constitution, and that's called the Law of Nations. And in his book, and confirmed by two other scholars, Burl McQuee and Pufendorf, that international law, Christian law, in those days, international law was based on the Ten Commandments. So I sat down and I wrote, I know this stuff is boring for you, and especially for the younger people, and that's why I interspersed the clips. So before I read this boring stuff, clip number 14.
International travel has become easier in an increasingly borderless world, and although international drug trafficking organizations have never respected national boundaries, newly globalized markets for the drug production and exportation, along with changing patterns of consumption in some societies, have been an enormous impact on drug trafficking. In short, the global market for illicit drugs and the capacity of providers to deliver to this market is expanding around the world. But to truly understand how the problem got to be as big as it is now, we must look back at the histories of its three most common drugs and how they shaped the
So you've got ISIS involved in the international drug routes. They've been doing it for 14 centuries. Hey, look, these ISIS guys are not brand new. They go back 14 centuries to the Prophet Muhammad. And hashish, the root word for assassin, they used to smoke the hashish to get fired up and have the courage to attack in accordance with Surah 860 to wage jihad and terrorize the infidels. And now they're working with the drug cartels because both of them, they want to get cash and they don't care about the Ten Commandments and they don't care who they kill. So going back again to the father of international law, who is written about, who is in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 of the U.S. Constitution, that the Ten Commandments is the basis of our laws. When the Marines asked me, when I was fired, I was hired by General Mattis' staff, and I was fired by General Mattis' staff. I was hired because in Vietnam, I operated at nighttime with a small unit of Marines and Vietnamese militias surrounded by the North Vietnamese Army. We were able to gather human intelligence. I was fluent in Vietnamese. I could talk to my Vietnamese sergeants and the families who wanted us to protect them from being raped and murdered. And as a result, we were extremely successful, similar to Wyatt Earp in Tombstone. We were very successful, very violent, very successful. Yes, we did operate off the Ten Commandments in Romans 13:4. We were revengers of the sword under the Ten Commandments as God and Jesus promulgated. It was very successful. And so I was sought out as a team leader and contacted, and I gave a brief to 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, how we operated, and they loved it, and then they offered me to lecture to the Marines going to Iraq on Islamic philosophy and Arabic. I had Arabic translators with me, so I said, sure, and we agreed on $500 an hour. I was quickly fired because in our first lecture we were presenting that Muhammad was insane and crazy, which he was, and that he liked to rape and murder and cut off people's heads, which he did, which he used the 4 Arabic words to con, like a con man, a convict man, to fool people, the 4 Arabic words on how to lie, Taqiya, Kitman, Maruna, and Tariya. And we explained that. I was quickly pulled out of class by the G3 operations officer, full colonel. He said, you can't do that. We have to be politically correct. And through the course of events, they kept asking me, why are you so intent about talking about the religion of Islam? What does religion have to do with it? Well, Islamic battle planning, as I pointed out in our last lecture on this, is based on the Quranic concept of war. The Sharia, the laws of Islam, are encapsulated in the battle planning of any of the Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan, or any Muslim country in the world, be it Turkey or Indonesia, Malaya, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter. They're all based on the Quran, the Quranic concept of war. And 22 verses in the Quran tell the people who are Muslims, do what Muhammad did. 22 verses. We have stipulated that in prior lectures on this TV show many times. So, in trying to respond to these very educated people, they're all very educated people. General Mattis is called the warrior monk because he's got over 5,000 books in his collection at his home, and he reads all the time. But my question to General Mattis and the other Marines is, what do you read? Why don't you read the truth about what did Muhammad do? Okay, so again, they kept asking me, what does religion have to do with warfare? In other words, what does religion have to do with government? So I came up with this, and I think it's pretty good. The symbiotic relationship between common law, governance, religion, the law of nature as proven by DNA is interesting. Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America is all about this. He compares the Protestants of the American Revolution to the Catholics of Europe and Mexico. It's mega powerful. It's now gone, and we have multiple common laws promulgated by non-Protestants who hate the ideals of America. Teddy Kennedy's Immigration Act of 1965 ended our America that we knew as kids. In the Immigration Act of 1919, only Protestants could come into the United States, and the reason was, as de Tocqueville said, it was the Protestant form of Christianity based on the 10 Commandments, and every man could go directly to Jesus, didn't need a priest as an intercessor, and that we, the individual, could make moral decisions by reading the 10 Commandments and praying to Jesus for guidance as we did it. And that's in this book. It's in this book. See how thick this book is? This book's over 800 pages long. It's in this book. And it's in many, many other sources that we have used on this show over the last 10 years. In Article 1, Section 8, and Clause 10, the Law of Nations, Hugo Grotius, the father of international law, James Madison called him the international law. His Law of Nations is proven in this book here, Democracy in America. Very fascinating. Grotius pointed out in Europe's Christendom that the Law of Nations was based on the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, Deca meaning 10, and log, the law. See the page attached from the Pentagon in 1957, which I've shown on these shows before. The primary job of the military officer in the United States is to protect the Decalogue as it is the basis of the Constitution. Now, that was promulgated by the Department of Defense. Now we come into the problems we're having today. James Mattis, FBI Director Comey, George W. Bush, the entire leadership of the GOP, the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, the Supreme Court, Paul Ryan, and John McCain laugh, ha, 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 laugh at this. In fact, when I showed that publication to my friend who got me hired by General Mattis' staff, that the primary job of the military officer is to defend the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, he says, I've never heard of that, and they would laugh us out of the room today if we tried to talk that way. Well, in World War II and World War I, Civil War, War of 1812, Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, it was all under the Ten Commandments. Now, Dennis Prager on his show on February 5th, 2018, said he was glad the Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Foles gave thanks to Jesus for their victory because he, Dennis Prager, is a Jew. And he knows that America is a Christian nation, and if America stops being a Christian nation, the Jews will be hunted down and murdered. So I've talked about some people here. This is Mueller, who used to be the FBI director. Robert Mueller used to be the FBI director, and he is completely out of sync with what I just said, and he's leading that crazy investigation of Trump based on a made-up dossier. Now, here you have Mueller here, James Clapper, and you have John Brennan of the CIA. And we will show our next clip beginning at, let's see here, clip number 9. Clip number 9, we'll see how fantastic and virtually insane these leaders are that I just pointed out to you. Clip number 9.
Before the House Intelligence Committee, there was a disconnect. First, the Director of National Intelligence.
The term Muslim Brotherhood is an umbrella term for a variety of movements. In the case of Egypt, a very heterogeneous group, largely secular, which has eschewed violence and has decried Al-Qaeda as a perversion of Islam. But there is no...
Right, so there we got James Clapper. He was the director in charge of all of the different intelligence agencies in the United States. I believe there's 17 or 18 when you add his in. And Mueller sitting right next to him didn't say a word. Qui non improbat approbat. He who does not disapprove approves. And John Brennan, who thinks Islam is the greatest and most wonderful thing in the world, and he was director of the CIA. So you got Robert Mueller in his key position, and he eschews and rejects Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, the law of nations, being based on the Ten Commandments. So we've absolutely, our leaders have walked away from this concept of the Ten Commandments and the symbiotic relationship of the common law, the governance, and religion. The common law is to governance what grammar is to communication. Grammar, for a 10-year-old kid, is unwritten. He's learned it. He's got it inside of his head. It's unwritten inside of his thinking capacity. And he is able, when his house catches fire, just yell one word, fire, and everybody knows, get out of the house. He's communicating. Or if he is seeing a big brother beat up a little sister, he can go to his mom and dad and say, hey, Johnny's beating up Jill. And that's all he has to say. The grammar and the syntax are proper. Mom and dad understand that, and they are able to quickly make ethical decisions to get people out of the house, to save them, or to stop Johnny from beating Jill. Now, common law is the same type of thinking when it comes to government. Common law, if your common law comes from your Christian religion, and it happens to be based on the Ten Commandments, as Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, you read the Ten Commandments, you think about Jesus, as Mr. Foles says, and you think about protecting people, because doing unto others as you have done unto yourself is the mantra of Christendom and also of the Jews too. And so we go out of our way in our axiological or our ethical belief system to pass laws to protect widows and orphans, James 1:27. So here again, we're looking at, sadly, Mueller, Clapper, and the director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, and all three of them have rejected it. And as a consequence, since they have rejected the Ten Commandments, then they look to money from the guy who gave $73,000 to two of the guys who flew into the World Trade Center. It's a picture of the World Trade Center being blown up. Prince Bandar, who's very close friends with George W. Bush, Osama bin Laden, and with the King of Saudi Arabia, because we know the death knell of every republic is foreign money. So that drives us away from pastors and rabbis who believe in the Ten Commandments to now it's just money. Money's the answer to everything. If you get the money, you can be Sinaloa, MS-13, Los Zetas. If you get the money, you can be ISIS. And then working together, the two of them working together, they don't care who they kill. They don't care if they kill little boys. They don't care if they kill Jews. They don't care if they kill Muslims. They don't care who they kill. All of this stuff keeps coming back. Okay. Clip number 8. Clip number 4. Clip number 4.
For over half a century, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has been a fixture in science, in fiction, and in science fiction as well. The organization I'm talking about, of course, is NASA. But is NASA now at a crossroads? Well, who best to find out from than the administrator of NASA, Charles Bolden. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here. It's exciting for me to be here.
Well, it's fantastic having you on Talk to Al Jazeera. I know it's very rude to ask this of a guest, but my first question to you is, why are you here in the region?
Oh, I appreciate you asking the question. I'm here in the region. It's sort of the first anniversary of President Barack Obama's visit to Cairo and his speech there when he gave what has now become known as Obama's Cairo Initiative, where he announced that he really wanted this to be a new beginning of the relationship between the United States and the Muslim world. When I became the NASA administrator, or before I became the NASA administrator, he charged me with 3 things. One was he wanted me to help re-inspire children to want to get into science and math. He wanted me to expand our international relationships. And third, and perhaps foremost, he wanted me to find a way to reach out to the Muslim world and engage much more with dominantly Muslim nations.
All right, so we walked away from the international law being based on the Ten Commandments by Hugo Grotius. And so, as a result, we just went after money solves everything, which actually is in the Bible, but it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. And so, in our axiological beliefs, we don't go back to money as our metric for success and failure. We go back to the Ten Commandments, and we use money as a tool to further the kingdom of God and Jesus. So we go from Hugo Grotius, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, of the U.S. Constitution, the law of nations based on the Ten Commandments, to now, we don't care who we fund, we don't care who we kill, and we have these guys here. We got James Clapper, we got Mueller, we got Leon Panetta, and again, we've got Mueller, Clapper, and John Brennan of the CIA going out and doing the horrible things that they do and ending up right back here as we have with the MS-13, 18,000 of them operating in the Washington, D.C. and in every major city, working together with ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood. And so we go to clip number 5. Clip number 5.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. I'm deeply regretful that I cannot be with you this evening. As you listen to my message, I'm either in Qatar, Abu Dhabi, or Egypt, meeting with my Arab law enforcement colleagues. We are working on strategies of cooperation, public safety, and education on a worldwide basis. I want to thank CARE for the friendship that has been extended to me and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Executive Director Hussam Alouche and the staff are exceptional representatives of the Muslim community of America. Over the years, prior to the tragedy of 9/11, Muslim members of the Sheriff's Interfaith Advisory Council have taught me the core principles of his.
So he is thanking the guys that work with these dudes here, Osama bin Laden, Bandar, and the King of Saudi Arabia, who on money blew up everybody. He's talking about Council on American Islamic Relations, members of the Muslim Brotherhood. We have walked away from Hugo Grotius. We've walked away from Foles thanking Jesus. And we've walked into the nightmare where this Jewish kind man who wants his people not to be slaughtered and murdered by the Muslims, and he says, I hope that the Christians do not lose control of America, because if they do, all the Jews will be hunted down and murdered. To each and every one of you, good night.